Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. You've reached Venus Unplugged. It's a rainy Monday morning in New York City in Hell's Kitchen. And this rain kind of makes one reflective. So what we do here in Venus Unplugged is we explore all things Venusian, in personal love, the archetypal Venus, art and poetry, and myth and dreams. So what I want to start exploring, because it's always about exploring and opening and becoming, is the myth of INANNA. And INANNA was queen of heaven and earth. And then she did a tour of duty in the underworld with her dark shadow sister. So we all know those moments when we're near to heaven, and certainly on earth, and even more important, those journeys into the underworld or into our own inner world to face our unknown sister. It's usually a shadow sister. Although I've been doing some exploration and research into, the four types, thinking, feeling, intuitive, and sensate, and that there's actually four shadows. So won't that get you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning? So we have, of course, our collective shadow, but then each type that we are, it has a shadow personality. It has a reform, but that's a whole different story. But speaking of the underworld, so INANNA, this queen, this goddess, she was worshipped for, can't even say it, worshipped for thousands and thousands of years. 3,500 to 500 BCE. And she was the ancient Near East. And it was the beginning of civilization that flourished and was conquered. So she has many names, Ishtar, Ashtar, Ma, but she was first known as INANNA, the beloved and reverend deity of Sumer, the ancient city of Sumer. And despite hostile intrusions into her domain by the patriarchal sky gods. Now, these took thousands of years for these, belief systems. And so the development, I don't know if anybody's read that Before God Was a Woman. These are evolutionary stages in the civilization of humanity. So we are all of these things. We have all of this in the collective unconscious. So the nature of the collective unconscious is both matriarch and patriarch. Let's say, people can be afraid of heights. Well, it took, thousands and thousands of years for the humans to understand, like, the world isn't flat, don't walk off, you're going to fall. They didn't know what to fear. So in the collective unconscious is the things also that we've done thousands of times to learn a survival trait or to understand the way something happens. This is kind of the primitive organic state, and it lives in the world and has had all this information and living experiences, and the matriarch and patriarch. So when we explore myth and certainly dreams, for those that remember dreams, everybody does dream, but for those that remember the story of your psyche, it unveils in this most profound and poetic, symbolic life. So one of my great loves of INANNA is one of the ways that she received her powers, as it were. Her and her father were whooping it up in heaven and having a party and carrying on and drinking and eating and partying, kind of all those Venusian marvelous things. And so in his drunken state, he kept on giving her his powers. Here, my beloved daughter, take my scepter. Here, take my armor. So she said, thank you, Father dear. And the next morning, when God woke up a little fuzzy, bit of a hangover, I suppose, which would be a huge hangover, I guess, if you're a god, and called his servant and said, get my chariot and get my scepter and everything he asked for. The servant said, yo, man, you gave it to your daughter. So he goes to INANNA, and, if you're a good daughter, you're going to do what Papa wants. So INANNA said, sorry, Dad, a promise is a promise, a gift is a gift. I'm keeping them. And that's one of my favorite parts of this myth. It's a daughter who is gifted, is given the gifts, whether it's through ancestry or just gift or inheritance, or it could be an inheritance of a talent. It's like, no, it's mine. You gave it to me. I'm taking it, and I'm using it. Not, oh, I know you want this back because you're daddy dear, and I want to stay a little girl. I'm going to give you everything I want. You want back. Or the trick of, staying involved in an overprotective relationship with the father or the patriarch or the belief systems or God in heaven. I don't have to grow and become because God in heaven is going to do all the thinking for me or the feeling for me or back me up with my opinions. All of these are different ways that the feminine, both in male and female, live out. The act of becoming human is pretty close to divine, and it's a very long training period because we need to understand, first and foremost, I think one of the important things is, how shocks, deaths, shocks, losses, life doesn't turn out the way we designed it when we were 10 years old, we need to kind of remember there's the courage that we need in every kind of suffering. It's necessary. Heart rage, that's what courage means. The dragon in the heart raises up and says no or yes, whatever the choices are. And these shocks, it jerks us out of our trivial and subservience to the collective opinion. A lot of when people have not learned to think, they just recite opinions. It's just a bunch of opinions. They haven't learned to think it through and what they see as true. It's just somebody, they say. Well, who is this they? When someone says, they say, or what are they going to say? Who is this they? It's code for the collective unconscious. I don't really have a real argument, but I do have a big-ass opinion that I'm going to drop on you. So listen. If someone has something truly valuable to say, it will have a different tone. It's not an opinion. You can feel it. They've studied it, or they've worked through it, or they've had experiences. It's not just something, it's like, wow, I would have said that, but since I didn't think that and I didn't come up with that, I'm just going to have an opinion and say that. So when we get jerked out of our trivial wounding and our subservience to the collective opinion and reconnect with the sense of meaning and dignity of life, that's when we grow. Of course, usually screaming and yelling, but growth it is. Now, once we have grown in such a way, we have that for eternity. So this isn't like a one-shot wonder. And that then spills into the vastness of the collective unconscious, and then others, future and past, can draw on that. That's how things get around. Or many people can have the same creative idea and apply it different ways, and sometimes apply it in very similar ways. And they can be at, completely different parts of the world, but that's where it comes from. That source of the collective unconscious. So it's not your personal unconscious, it's collective unconscious, is the story, the epic story of man's civilization. And so, or the civilizing of man. And obviously we've got a lot more to work on with the way some of us are acting these days. But that's okay, too, because they're there to help others. And that's why we have enemies or frenemies. The enemy is going to know exactly where your button is and go for it. And if you don't know yourself, you'll fall for it. So, INANNA is obviously an aspect of the developing feminine that knows she is queen of heaven and earth. Just by the act of, no, Papa, I got the power, and I have to use it because I need that energy, that force field to be effective here on earth. So INANNA played an incredibly important role in the Sumerian myth. Now, the Sumerians were the first people to create symbolic writing. So this is huge. And, or cuneiform is what it's called, okay? And she was the great mother, she was mother, daughter, Venus. I mean, she was the go-to girl, okay? And her life inspired the poets of Sumer and transformed the much older myth into a cycle of impassioned verse. So the hymn to INANNA, it's an ecstatic hymn, and the songs and dance were sung in her temples throughout the Near East. And INANNA's sacred narrative includes the world's first love story, 2,000 years older than the Bible. It's tender, it's erotic, it's shocking, it's compassionate, it's badass. And when you read it, the first time I read the hymn, was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I'm still not over it. It's just this piece of exquisite, ecstatic. And you mentioned all these people singing it and dancing it and living it, because in the temple of INANNA, she lived there. I mean, in our culture, we've got Barbie dolls, but then the people believed that she actually lived in her temple, which is kind of really fantastic. And we have that, hopefully, in our lives, even a little bit. Whether it's a house of worship, that there is a belief system that is tied up in every stone. And there's a myth, because our myths, our current myths will shift and change. What's true will stay rooted, and what's not will move on. So we all have this opportunity. Or in our museums, we know that beauty lives, all kinds of beauty that we can go in and part of. But that she lived, she was there. You came into her home. And when we walk into somebody's home, the soul of the home and the home reveals its host and hostess, who tends to, who cares for. And when one loves their home and their hearth, you feel it, you know it. And other times you can walk into a person's home and they have no interest. It's, they'd rather be out in the woods running around, howling at the moon, and they enjoy that. They have a different energy. But when we walk into, in this case, a temple, she was there. And her priestesses, INANNA was also called the mother of harlots. Yep, you can't go bad with that one, right? It's a beautiful image. These were not just the sacred prostitutes, but these were priestesses that were alive with all aspects, because at that time, the gods and the goddesses, each one of them was supernatural, super beings, all that stuff. But they all had the human condition and the human experience and the human traits with bionic powers. All right. So this tender and erotic poem or hymn to INANNA filled the culture with dance, music, poetry, the sacred marriage of king to, the high priestess would carry out as INANNA, but the king to this myth, this queen of heaven. So this meaning of this goddess, and she's also connected to Lilith. See, there's Lilith from the Bible, all right, but Lilith is much older than that. And she's an aspect of INANNA because of the erotic nature. Our people were much closer to life. So you could feel life growing, or times of fertility. She also was a fertility goddess of the king. And the goddess had to merge, very much like the Celts, okay, in Avalon, to make love in the fields, to bring fertility to the land. So there wasn't a big separation for the people to the earth. And that's part of, I think, what we hear so much about now, the lamenting. It's not just what we're doing to the earth, but we've lost the connection, the passion, the love, the sexuality. When you walk with bare feet, an extraordinary experience. Even though I make shoes, I'm always barefoot. I went to Machu Picchu, and everybody said, "Oh, you got to bring boots," and so I did, which I just didn't want to, but I did. And as soon as I got to the entrance of Machu Picchu, I heard this voice, and it just said, "No, oh, absolutely not. You must walk barefoot. I have to tell you my story." I was blown away. I didn't feel any particular connection to Machu Picchu, but of course, I wanted to go because it was fun, and I was traveling with somebody that a dear friend at that time that I loved very much, and so, and we were meeting shaman friends and all that kind of stuff, so we were having a great time, but I didn't have a personal connection. I've got more the Aphrodite, Greek stuff going, or the Egyptian, but now, I've got the shaman with me who's this is her land and this is her work, and everything I would say, well, what about this? And she would be looking at me like, wow. So when one walks barefooted and listens to the land, it will tell you its story. I think this remembrance of these ancient ones, when the earth was blessed and continued to be blessed by its people, not taken over and twisted. This is also what this brings up. these kind of cycle of Inanna, which is the life and marriage and death and love affairs and going into the underworld. So the hymn of Inanna was sung at sacred marriage rites between the goddess and the Sumerian king to ensure the fertility of the land and to legitimize the king's rule. It was celebrated annually. And the role of the goddess in the ritual sexual union was taken place by her priestesses, the Hirodu. And they were believed to be the embodiment of the goddess herself. So it was like union with the goddess was of paramount importance for rule on the earth. And the cosmic powers of the goddess had to be transferred to the king to ensure his powers of leadership and fertility. Their sexual union was necessary to activate an annual cycle of life. Wouldn't that be lovely to bring that into one's own life? To remember that sexual union and, creating art, which in some ways is certainly an ecstatic union with some invisible force, creative force that's moving you to write or draw or dance or sculpt. Okay? The sacredness. So this was part of. It was all written out in her poem, in her ecstatic poem. So every year, Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, descended from earth at a time of the autumn equinox to consummate her marriage to, I think you say it, Dumuzi, Dumuzi, Dumuzi. Well, I'm going to have to find out. And at her temple. And the sacred law of Sumer was dictated, the order and the form of things, and ordained that day as the beginning of the new year, when the earth awakened and the winter crop of barley from which they made their bread and beer was planted. So while the surviving record is written from the vantage point of those who would suppress the goddess, right, she still shined through, because it took thousands and thousands of years to shift people's belief into the sky god. And it never worked completely. So in these rites, I'm kind of imagining, it's taken away with just imagining this beauty of all of this. So Sumer was actually what was called the Garden of Eden, because it was a barren land, but these people, through the inspiration of their goddess, and both in planting and beauty and lore, and she knew everything, and they would listen to her, and through her inspiration and guidance, this barren land was eventually turned into the Garden of Eden, what they call in the Bible. So this is real. And her temple was many-storied. It was called a ziggurat. And it was constructed to the house and the deity under whose auspices the city was thought to live out its destiny and to prosper. So each city had their own, what we would maybe see it as an archangel, or even in astrology, everything has a ruling planet. So this is, in a sense, the ruling planet, and they would plant and lived their lives according to this particular goddess, and it prospered. So it's by the, I guess it would be, it would definitely be the Near East. So Inanna's temple, the sacred house of heaven, as it was called, the house of heaven, is the oldest preserved temple at Uruk. And it's an enormous mud brick construction, more than 30 times 30 meters in size. And the main temple is set in a limestone base with these unusual features, all right, in a region where stone was so rare. So that's another thing. It's kind of one of those mysteries. How did the pyramids, how'd they build the pyramids? I always thought, well, maybe they were just old giants. That was like building blocks. But nobody believes that one, except me, of course, in my fantasy world. So the temple was this 3-part plan. It was composed of 2 aisles and flanking a nave, and at the end of the nave, a rectangular central shrine, the Holy of Holies. So Inanna was the Holy of Holies. And the main temple is also connected to a smaller shrine that is supported by a colossal circle columns of mud brick. And it opens to an open court. I'm going to try to find an image of it on me and my love of Pinterest. I love images. And there's a statue of the goddess, and it stood in this shrine. And I think I put up one yesterday. I mean, there's something about these particular goddesses, these goddesses, Sumers and Inanna. They have a startling emotional and spiritual intensity, and you're taken, even in a little bit of awe, a little bit of fear. And the whites of their eyes are like they're bold and they're staring out, and they're heavily lined in black, and the pupils are set with deep blue lapis. And it's usually standing or sitting, and they're quite extraordinary. At first you think, wow, UFO, man. But as you settle into your instincts and really observe, it's just, there's an ecstasy that you feel. And also when you imagine, at that time, the people of that time, it had to be glorious and participate as a single whole to plant and to move and this love. They loved their goddess as she loved them. So at the center of Inanna's cult was the temple with its priests and priestesses, musicians, singers, and they performed different sexual rituals. And women and men served equally in the temple. So here's an early example of the male and the female getting along. There wasn't this great conflict. Now, overriding this, the patriarch and that were kind of in the far distance, but just that experience. So we're going to be looking at this myth for a couple of weeks now. So this was just an introduction into to get a sense of where we're going to meet in Inanna's temple and tell her story. And I think next week we will go into her story and her tree of knowledge. So till then, and I'm going to find some pictures and put them up. Have a glorious week, and just do something to surprise yourself. That's always fun. Bye-bye.
Napa know-how.
A Napa guy knows more isn't always better, unless we're talking about full-size vans. These beasts do more than get you from A to B. They have so much space a man can live in it. With shag carpeting, waterbed, and a sweet lava lamp, these mobile abodes have all the comforts of home. With quality parts and plenty of Napa know-how, you can keep the original tiny house running longer, stronger. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.
Progressive brings you Flowetry with Flo.
When Flo flows, she flows in the know. Mind ruminates the rates. Shown them all, I heed the call. Seeing the rest, I choose the best. Sometimes it's ours, sometimes it's not. When the fox walks, is it called a fox trot? That's a real question.
Compare Progressive Direct rates with competitors' rates. Visit Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. This is very based on how you buy. This is very based on how you buy. This is very based on how you buy.